Hi, welcome to this video on law problem questions, where Julia and I are going to talk you through what this assignment type is, how it slightly differs from your typical legal essays, and we'll look at an example towards the end of the video as well. So just starting with a definition, Julia, how would we define a law problem question as being fundamentally different to a typical essay?
Yes, so I think one of the most important things is to think about this as a rational legal response to a particular scenario that you're given, and you're doing this through a structured application of the law. So this is a really clear definition on how you best to approach it.
Yeah, exactly. It's reliant on evidence, like any piece of academic work should be. It's reliant on factual evidence, which would be the evidence provided to you in the case, in the scenario. It's certainly reliant on case law and legislation. What it's less reliant on is academic references, particularly like academic discourse. So it's not a dive into an academic debate. It's not really interested in that. And as we're going to sort of highlight for you in a minute, you're typically positioned as a solicitor advising a client or somebody in particular, and talking them through the case. So, you know, an interesting way of putting it, I think, is that in that scenario, you're not going to be, you know, talking to a client about the academic development of a particular concept. You know, they're not interested in that. They just want to know the law, how it applies to them. So yeah, reliant on evidence, but not so much academic discourse, which is obviously quite different to a legal essay. But there are some similarities, Julia.
Yeah, absolutely. So even though it doesn't rely as much on that or at all on that academic discourse, it does need to follow some of the conventions of academic writing. So one of the things that's really important to do is that you make sure your writing is clear and precise, you're expressing your ideas clearly and precisely, and that you're developing that through a structure of coherent paragraphs. So you're making the case through these paragraphs, which follow a kind of coherent idea.
Yeah, exactly, which is sort of very similar across the board, academically speaking. Okay, so some example titles for you. I mean, these aren't going to be massively useful because actually most of what you need is the case scenario which they give you, and this is often quite lengthy. It's, you know, 300-400 words roughly, and quite a lot of detail, and they'll give you the ins and outs of a particular case and introduce you to the particular parties and intentions and actions and sequence of events and that kind of stuff. What they tend to culminate in, or they might start with, is a statement or succession of sentences like what we've got here. So, for example, you as Sean's solicitor advise him. So that's how it's positioning you. It's positioning you as Sean's solicitor, and you're supposed to advise him on this particular situation. It might be something a bit more detailed, like you are a solicitor and Jane comes to you for advice. She's been having some problems with her business and needs to know where she stands. I think that's one that starts it, and then you learn the case after that. Or, you know, discuss the criminal liability, if any, of Willow and Xander. So, you know, slight variation on those, but that's basically the kind of title you'll be given. We talked in a previous video about essay titles. It's a similar sort of set up here, in that you've got to, you know, really focus on what's being asked of you. You know, how are you being positioned, what you're being asked to do. But yeah, this aligned with your case scenario is obviously your starting point for this assignment type. Some sort of basic do's and don'ts here, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's really important to bear in mind is that you're keeping every bit of information that you're including relevant. So make sure that the relevant information is what you're including, and that you're not stating absolutely everything you know. You're not throwing all your knowledge at the particular scenario or situation, because that wouldn't be demonstrating your critical thinking or your critically analytical ideas. It's really important that you demonstrate that, so that your reader knows that you've thought really carefully about the relevant, important information for this particular scenario. This next quote, where has been provided to us by the law faculty, and they say that as a lawyer, your client will not care about the evolution of the test of oblique intention. And one of the things about this is that it's about, again, not analysing all the aspects of it, and it's about making sure that the information you're including there is wholly relevant in your ideas and in the situation you're approaching.
Yeah, exactly. So it might be that you need to unpick oblique intention, you know, the like how it's defined in relation to the case. But basically, I think what they're saying there, isn't it, Julia, that they're not interested as a marker in this context of how the term has been academically treated and how it's evolved over time. That's not what they're interested in. It's just, you know, apply the test, apply the relevant or probe the relevant elements of the test or whatever. So yeah, just like Julia said, keep it relevant. It's not everything you know about the topic on the page. It's more selective than that. On a similar point, be efficient with your words. So there will be some aspects of the case where you can just sort of deal with it quite succinctly. You know, here's an application of the law. This is, you know, therefore what it means. It might not be very contentious. Use minimal words for that stuff, because there should be some aspects of the case, you know, selected. These cases are selected or sort of designed for you or with a particular purpose in mind, so that you can really probe some of the more contentious and ambiguous issues. So there will be some areas of the particular scenario where they want you to be a little bit more thoughtful, a bit more nuanced in the way that you think through the law and the tests and whatever it might be. So save words for that stuff. Some particular phrase here that again we were provided with a particular mantra, I suppose. If X is true, then Y. But if A is true, then B. So if X is true, then Y would be your sort of surface level description. Yeah, this means that, therefore this. But if A is true, then B is really getting to the heart of what if that isn't true, or what if it's defined in a slightly different way or interpreted in this way. And that's sort of what that really is getting at.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's about probing those ambiguities, which is really important. Mm-hmm. Another element is that, which is really vital, particularly for these problem questions, is this need to support all your arguments with case law or legislation. This is where you're demonstrating that you're engaging with the case law, that you have full knowledge of it, and that you can implement it in this particular scenario to best advise your potential clients. So it's really important this case law or legislation is front and center of any of the arguments that you're presenting within this piece of writing.
Yeah, exactly. When you get your scenario, you need to break the scenario down. So there will be various layers, various components, various incidents, events that happen. Address each one in turn, and think of a hierarchy of seriousness, which is the way we've put it, which is basically a way of saying treat the most urgent and pressing issues first and work your way down from there. So going back to these titles, for example, Willow and Zander, for the final one there, you might deal with Willow and Zander separately, or it might be that you deal with different aspects of the case relating to both of them separately, but deal with it one by one, unpick it and address each issue one by one. Willow and Zander, Julia's informed me, is a Buffy reference, and with what you'll find hopefully interesting about your scenarios is often they do smuggle cultural references, pop references into them. So they're normally like based on TV shows and stuff. So I've seen Mad Men, I've seen Breaking Bad in these scenarios, which arguably adds a bit of fun to proceedings. So you keep an eye out for that. But Willow and Zander, apparently that's a Buffy reference. So yeah, but just going back to that, you know, you might deal with the particular party separately, you might deal with different events separately, but just take it in turn, one at a time, and work through it in a sort of methodical fashion. And sort of finally, Julia, about reaching a conclusion.
Yeah, so going through that methodical fashion will allow you to reach a conclusion, and this is again vital in these problem questions, because if you are presented with this scenario and you're being asked to advise your client on it, you need to give them an answer. You need to give them a conclusion that you've reached based upon the evidence that you have looked at, that you have analysed, that you have probed. And reaching this conclusion is a really vital aspect of this particular assignment, as it is for a lot of academic assignments, but particularly for this one.
Yeah, exactly. You need to reach a position based on your understanding of the evidence. I mean, it might be multiple positions potentially, but you need to reach a position. Right, we're going to look at an example. So this is a real example from a past student. Now, you might want to pause the video and read it properly. We're not going to read it out for you, obviously, but you can pause the video and have a proper read. We'll unpick it a little bit, and we'll just highlight some particular aspects of it. So what you'll see from the outset in that first short paragraph there is that they're just highlighting a particular aspect of the case. So like we were saying a minute ago, you unpick the case event after event, incident after incident, step by step. So they're highlighting one particular aspect of the case there that they're going to unpick. So signposting wise, that's clear. Then in this paragraph 2 and 3, they're doing something different, Julia.
Yeah, so in this paragraph, they're really demonstrating that they have a knowledge of the law, that they're able to use the correct law, but they're not quite yet probing that law and analysing it fully. So this is where they're signposting to their reader, I'm aware of this law, this is significant to this is relevant to this scenario, but they're going to go into probing that further a bit later in the next few paragraphs. One other thing to say as well is that they also use this word secondly in that third paragraph. This is just, we've highlighted this as something where they're really signposting to their reader that they're looking at something in an alternative way. And this is quite an important thing, just to indicate to your reader that you've thought about this carefully and analytically. But overall, it's just about that knowledge of the law being introduced in these paragraphs.
Yeah, exactly. And then fourth paragraph, what they're doing is applying it. So they're demonstrating knowledge of the law, and they're going to apply it. So we've got various statements there that we've highlighted where they're reaching conclusions based on their application of law events. The law says this, we apply that factually to this case based on the facts provided, and this is what it means. So they're doing that sort of quite methodically, step by step, and then just reaching a sort of a more general conclusion at the end there. So they have reached a clear position based on these various sort of smaller positions, I suppose. So that's good. What is more questionable? I mean, we don't know exactly what mark this got, but what would have boosted the mark and what would have elevated it slightly more? It's sort of in that fourth paragraph, isn't it, Julia?
Yeah, absolutely. There's kind of a sense that in that final sentence of this fourth paragraph, that there's a potential for this to be probed further, to present those arguments where they say if X is Y, then A is B. There's that potential to look at that ambiguity and to sort of demonstrate a sense of being comfortable in that ambiguity, rather than this quite clear-cut sentence which doesn't really, and as we say, we don't know the law itself, but doesn't really on the surface of things seem to present that relationship between the action and the psychiatric injury as fully as it could do. There's potential there to go further, and there's potential to move this on further as well.
Yeah, I'll second what you said. We definitely don't know the law, right? And so there might be, we might have picked an example here where actually it is pretty straightforward. And I was saying a minute ago, save your words. So be efficient. This might be a pretty straightforward part of the case, in which case they don't want to sort of probe stuff they don't really need to probe and unpick it. But you do get an instinct for stuff when you read a lot in an academic context, and it just feels to us quite surface level. There's quite a black and white application of the law. I think it's quite a case of saying, here's what the law says, therefore this is what it means. which is the logic you want, but is there more that could be said here? Like Julia said, that there seems to be quite a big logical leap from secondly, she developed the psychiatric injury as a result of Anthony's breach of duty owed to the final conclusion. It's quite a big logical leap. There might be more to unpick there. Is there actual clear evidence that the actions are the result of the psychiatric injury, for example? What if, and again, making this up, it might not be relevant, but what if Diana in this case has a history of psychiatric episodes? If she's prone to that, does that change the case in any way? That may or may not be provided for you. You don't want to make anything up. You want to work with the facts of the case, but just to get you thinking a little bit more about how you can move this beyond that surface level, you know. Otherwise, it's nice and clear in the way it's written, and it's, you know, it's straightforward. It needs a little bit more depth, a bit more nuance, I think we'd argue.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's just an example as to, you know, what a law problem question response looks like, just a small part of that. That's it. We hope, you know, we were able to sort of introduce you as a starting point to what a law problem question assignment is and how it differs from your typical law essay. So yeah, we hope you found that useful. And if we haven't seen you for the other videos yet, or one of the other videos, we'll see you for those.
Thanks.